The Falklands War is perhaps the most well-known micro-war in history. There are tons of videos about the conflict on YouTube, countless mods, mostly from RGs, and if you speak Spanish, there are a lot of movies about the war and even a TV series somewhat based off of Band of Brothers. So then, with this popularity, one would assume there's a shooter dedicated to the conflict that pays full homage to the war, but you would be mistaken. And personally, I believe this is a huge missed opportunity. For one, most of the veterans of this war are still alive, which means there's a goldmine of personal experience we can utilize. You know how series like The Pacific are based off of real stories from veterans? Well, I think there's a great opportunity to have something similar done but in a video game format. A friend of mine's father, as an example, actually fought on Malvinas during the war and he was at the airport when the British were bombing it. Real experiences like that serving as a backdrop for a game would just do a myriad of immersion for the players. And because the war was so short, you can effectively tackle every major perspective and pay the proper homage to every soldier and marine who fought on the island. Remember how I said earlier most of the mods about this war are from Argentinians? Well, that represents an interesting dilemma that's occurred. In terms of representing the war and giving respect to the soldiers, the Spanish-speaking world absolutely blows the English one out of the water because nobody keeps this conflict in living memory quite like Argentinians do. Meanwhile, however, the British have 100% won the war for the narrative, at least in the English-speaking world, but you never hear a damned thing about the Royal Marines who actually fought there. There aren't any major mods made by British people I can think of, and most of the films from the British angle are either all 30 plus years old, low budget, or both. So in the context of a game, we can correct this error and finally let stories of the British have some spotlight as well as shine some light on the Argentinian POV in the English world. However, an idea is only as good as its execution, and people will rightfully point out the island is nothing more than a rock in the ocean, and to that you're right, but that doesn't have to mean any idea is inherently bad. It's about how you establish the gameplay, and I personally think going the route of a more realistic shooter is the best approach. A lot of the combat on Malvinas was short skirmishes, with only a few drawn-out battles, so logically having a more arcadey game wouldn't exactly be fun, and that's because the game would have to either be super short or jeopardize historical authenticity. So, to slow the game's pace down, I propose the core gameplay tenet be a rank-based structure. What do I mean by that? Well, you know how in Battlefield you have classes with their own unique abilities and traits? What if, instead of that, we have an extremely in-depth rank structure for the soldiers that would be based on the company structures used in real life? So, as an example, in real life, the Royal Marines during the Falklands War had an organization system that worked somewhat like this. A section, the British equivalent of a squad, was broken up into two groups. A GPMG group led by a Lance Corporal and a rifle group predominantly led by the Corporal who also functioned as the section commander. Around 3 of these sections formed a troop which was led by a lieutenant with a sergeant as the assistant troop commander, and one more above that, a few troops was a company led by a captain. So, in a video game context, I think we can take some inspiration from games like SOCOM or Brothers in Arms. In both of these game series, the player is actually given the ability to control the troops in their squad. In the case of SOCOM, you can order your sailors to plant explosives, hold a position, and even throw flashbangs, and a shit ton more things that I honestly forgot about. Brothers in Arms is a little more basic, but with a few simple button presses, you can have your squad mates giving you covering fire and advancing on enemy positions. And because it's 2026, we have a lot more capabilities than we did in the 2000s, so it only makes sense we expand on these mechanics. I think you see where I'm going with this, but obviously if you play as a private, that'll be the closest to your average shooter experience. All you need to do is take orders and try to keep yourself alive. But if you happen to be playing as a corporal, then basic mechanics start to open up to you. Sure, you'll still have a set objective, but the actual ins and out of how that's done are up to you now. In my mind, this would equate to basic things like having your section give you covering fire, hold position, advance to certain areas, etc. And once you start playing as a lieutenant, then you have the power to shape the entire battle to what you see fit as a player, which to me means you'll basically be playing a mini RTS but in first person mode. Maybe have some map mechanic where in real time you can direct sectors where to advance, how, and when. But let's not incentivize players to treat their men as disposable, because keeping them alive should be a top priority. Because this hypothetical game would be a realistic shooter, there wouldn't be any respawns for the NPCs. You have to make what you have work. There also wouldn't be regenerating health or pinpoint accurate weapons. For a comparison, you'd basically have to play this more like Arma 3 or Hell Let Loose. Now, this is all fine and dandy, but how can a single player narrative possibly touch on both sides of the war coherently? Well, I believe it's more than possible if we take some notes from Battlefield 2 Modern Combat. If you're not familiar with the game, I suggest you check out my video on it here, but in summary, Battlefield 2 Modern Combat doesn't have a protagonist. The story is conveyed through news segments and a general explains your missions to you. Really, the best way the campaign can be described is as a narrative multiplayer match where you simply play as normal soldiers trying to achieve an objective. This is for the best, because most of Argentina's units surrendered pretty quickly after the Royal Marines landed on the island, which makes a continuous narrative with them impossible. So, in my opinion, the story of this game would be best delivered by jumping around the island at various points from the perspective of both countries. This would also allow for maximum use of having veterans or their accounts be the biggest backdrop of the game's story. And I know you guys want a more coherent idea of how I envision this working, so I made up an example using the first days of the invasion. The first level could open with a major historical segment detailing what was happening in Argentina and Britain's governments at the time. And as this is going on, the historical segments can cut to Argentinian and British veterans describing what they were doing that day. When this segment is said and done, we can then transition into gameplay. Most notably, on the first day of the invasion was the 3-hour standoff at the government house where one Argentinian commando died. Under a more arcadey game, this would pretty much suck to play, but if we use the more realistic mechanics I described earlier, it could be a pretty intense and fun opening. And once the Brits surrender and the government house falls, it only makes sense we tell the British side of the invasion in the same format. But comically, for this to be historically accurate, we would need to leave Malvinas entirely and head over to Grytviken in South Georgia. This isn't very well known, but Argentina did invade this island too with 60 soldiers, a helicopter, and corvette for support. In spite of the obvious and severe disadvantage, the 22 Royal Marines on the island managed to destroy the helicopter, inflict 12 casualties on the Argentinians, and even damage the corvette. Though, the corvette was so poorly maintained its guns jammed the entire battle, so yeah. And using this formula, you can basically hit every major and even some minor battles of the entire war all the way through to the end. Now, as great as this sounds in my head, that doesn't mean there aren't some flaws with making an entire game around this war. For one, let's get the most obvious issue out of the way for a shooter. Your choice of weapons basically boils down to the FN FAL or the FN FAL. Sure, there were some other weapons used like the Sterling or FN60, but the reality is these weapons were drops in the bucket compared to the amount of FALs being used. And being a more realistic FPS campaign already turns a lot of potential customers away as is, so a lack of weapon variety would be even worse. The only real compromise to this would be to simply exaggerate reality, and a lot too. I'm sure for most people that won't matter, but I can already see the amount of complainers typing negative comments about it as we speak. Second, let's be fully blunt here, the Falklands are nothing more than a set of rocks in the ocean. Whilst yes, I did say earlier the gameplay matters above all, that doesn't change the fact players want a variety in levels, and the setting makes that an extremely difficult task. Now fortunately, I do think this hypothetical campaign would be a short and sweet one, but even just 5 hours of borderline the same map can get very repetitive. And lastly, though this one is a much more unexpected issue, is the amount of popular mods for Malvinas. On paper, this should make the game an automatic hit with that very specific niche of autists, but I could easily see this backfiring. It is very, very easy for a ton of people to look at a game like this, even if good, and just say, I can do that in Arma 3, or why not just play Project Reality on Battlefield 2? In fact, that actually happened to me when I told a friend about the concept for this video. And the shame is too, the people who could be making this game are probably the very people making the aforementioned mods. But who am I to tell them what to do? Whilst I would love for this game to exist, simple reality is it probably won't. But fortunately for me, this video wasn't in vain. I've wanted to make it for a long time, and it was the much needed short break from my upcoming COD 2 Medals video. Anyways, subscribe if you like my content because a shocking amount of you are returning viewers, so I would appreciate it.